Well, I want to say good morning to everybody again. I'm just doing a visual count on Zoom, and it looks like we do have a quorum. I just wanted to make sure that Councillor Brockington is with us, though his square is blanked out since he has a big file coming up. Perfect. Excellent. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Built Heritage Subcommittee meeting of April 12th, 2022. I'd like to call the members to order. This meeting is being held remotely through Zoom. Those who do not need to participate in the meeting can also watch it live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel. Though this meeting is being held virtually, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which Ottawa is built is unceded Algonquin-Anishinaabe territory. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge that the peoples of the Algonquin-Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the people and the land of the Algonquin-Anishinaabe Nation, and the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable contributions to this land. A reminder to participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, press *9 to raise your hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declaration of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to the subcommittee, residents may still make written submissions to Planning Committee and Council. If you have technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator by calling 613-580-2424, extension 22953. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. At this time, I've received regrets from Vice Chair Quinn. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they're called.
Member Halsall.
Present, thank you.
Member Podolsky.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Member Conforti.
Present.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Moffitt. Vice Chair Quinn. Chair King.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, I have also, as we have just seen, I've received regrets from Vice Chair Quinn. So at this point, if there are any motions that do come before us that are technical in nature, I might ask one of the other members to fill in for that. Are the minutes of Tuesday, March 8th, 2022 confirmed?
Carried.
Thank you. Our first item refers to planning, real estate, and economic development, right-of-way, heritage, and urban design services. The first item is Carlington North Veterans Housing Heritage Study. I understand that Councillor Brockington has a motion to add his comments as ward councillor to the report, along with a technical amendment drafted by staff to update the climate implication sections of the report. Councillor Brockington, would you please introduce that motion?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you and colleagues. Yes, this motion is intending to do two things, as the Chair just explained, appending my comments, which missed the deadline. That's my fault, totally my fault. And to add a climate implications section to the staff report. So, Chair, I'm not going to read my comments. Basically, I'm very supportive of this study that our heritage staff proceeded with. Their Engagement with the community was extensive and to my satisfaction, and we had good turnouts and engagement from the public. So my comments are there, and also I'm supportive of one of the staff recommendations to look at heritage designations for a local park and church. Secondly, staff wish to provide a comment with respect to climate implications, and that is the second part of this motion, the technical amendment that would add these comments. So in summary, that's what we're dealing with my motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. So thank you for that submission, and we will talk about that after both staff and deputants make comments. So can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, Chair and members of committee. In 2019, through the Citywide Heritage Inventory Project, Council directed staff to conduct additional heritage analysis of the Veterans Housing subdivisions in Carlington North. Greg McPherson, Emma Dodens, and myself, my name's Avery Marshall, we formed this core study team. Today, Greg and I will provide a brief overview. The first part of the presentation offers a summary of the study and the findings. The second part of the presentation looks at the recommendations for conserving the area's heritage. Next slide, please. So an overview, Wartime Housing Limited, a federal crown corporation, built and managed houses for war workers and for veterans during a nationwide housing crisis following the Second World War. In Ottawa, 2 subdivisions were built by Wartime Housing Limited in Carlington North. These subdivisions are referred to as Veterans Housing Project number 1 and Veterans Housing Project number 2. The subdivisions are the subject of the study, and they were completed right after the war ended. Next slide, please. So here you'll see the 2 subdivisions marked. The first in yellow, the first subdivision was 200 rental houses. They were constructed just south of, well, on Carling Avenue and south of there at Merivale Road. Construction started in 1945. So while the war was ongoing, the war ended in 45, construction continued until early 1946. The subdivision lands were then annexed from Nepean to Ottawa. Quickly afterward, almost right afterward, the second subdivision, so shown in purple, another 200 rental homes were built, as well as W.E. Gowling Public School. They're built immediately south of the first subdivision in a seamless sort of road configuration. The second subdivision began in 1946 and was completed in 1947. And again, the lands were annexed to Ottawa. Next slide, please. The study area. So the study area bounds, they're based precisely on those subdivision plan boundaries. So projects 1 and 2. So this is the area between Carling, Fisher, General, and Marshall Avenues and Merivale Road on the west. The area is primarily residential. It consists of 440 property parcels. So when you break them down, it's 428 residential, there's 5 open spaces, 3 mixed-use buildings, 2 institutional buildings, 1 place of worship, and 1 commercial building. So of the 428 residential, 418 are veterans homes. So 95% of the properties in the study area contain the original veterans houses built by Wartime Housing Limited. Next slide, please. The heritage study for Carlington North Veterans Housing, it was developed to achieve the council direction. Study was undertaken by heritage planning staff in 3 overlapping phases. The first, research and documentation. The second was community engagement. And the third, analysis and evaluation. This method is in keeping with the general model for heritage conservation to understand the historic place and to manage change. Next slide. Our timeline. The study began last summer 2021, and it continued through fall and winter. Our work included an inventory of buildings and streets, historical research at libraries and archives, streetscape analysis, built form analysis, an online survey, an e-newsletter, and several public information sessions and informal meetings. Next slide, please. So towards the end of the study, we started the heritage analysis. And as part of that, we looked at each element that makes up the subdivision, as well as the historical associations with each of the subdivision components. This exercise included much more than a review of the individual houses. Next slide, please. Together with historical research and site documentation, the heritage analysis revealed to us three main elements that define the area's heritage character. First, its pattern of development. So this is referring to how the streets are laid out, notably cul-de-sacs, ellipses, median islands, and very curved streets. It also includes the uniform orientation of the houses towards the street and the continuity of green front lawns. The second element we found is the area's direct association with Wartime Housing Limited, with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as well as connections with local governments. So as I mentioned, the Nepean and with Ottawa. The third element, character defining element, is the area's association with Ottawa's post-war transition and development. Next slide, please. So the houses, the veterans' houses. Through the study, we found the post-war homes built by Wartime Housing Limited are generally characterized by common attributes. So this would be the 1 to 1.5 story height, the side gable built form, primary entrance that faces the street, very simple window pattern, uniform cladding. This is typically siding, horizontally laid siding, and a consistent relation to the street. When you count all the steps, usually no more than 5 steps to get up to the front door. Next slide, please. The study findings outline that the veterans housing subdivisions have cultural heritage value, and they have a very special heritage character. So this character is found in the relationship of the subdivision elements. So this is the roadways, parkland, the buildings, and the open areas. Together, these elements contribute to a distinct sense of place that reflects the identity of the veterans housing subdivisions and the history of veterans housing in Ottawa and in Canada. The veterans housing subdivisions in Carlington North survive as legacies of the Second World War and as markers in the growth and development of post-war Ottawa. They were built in direct response to the housing crisis of the post-war, and the subdivisions reflect a coordinated effort from several levels of government and various private sector players at a time of considerable need. They are some of the first subdivisions built in Ottawa after the Second World War, and they represent a defining moment in residential planning in Ottawa and in Canada. Before we go to the next slide, I want to take a moment to thank our main researcher, Emma Dodens, who interned with the project through the Young Canada Works program. The history of the subdivisions is outlined in great detail in the supporting material, thanks to Emma's skillful research and to her writing. Now I invite my colleague Greg McPherson to continue the second part of the presentation that looks at the staff recommendation and next steps. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Avery, and good morning, everybody. So following the study, staff reviewed multiple conservation tools that were enabled under both the Ontario Heritage Act and the official plan, as well as options that kind of fall outside that realm. So after deliberation and consider conversations with stakeholders, we recommend a 5-part strategy to recognize the veterans housing subdivision. So I'm going to take you through each of these recommendations, the first being number 1, to approve the creation of the veterans housing character area. So next slide, please. So recommendation 1 is to approve the creation of the Veterans Housing Character Area as set out in document 1 in the area shown on the slide here. So staff recommend identifying the 2 subdivisions as a cultural heritage character area to be known as the Veterans Housing Character Area. So a cultural heritage character area is a tool that recognizes and commemorates the collective value of these subdivisions and the contributions of individual houses. Staff reviewed multiple conservation tools enabled under both the OHA and the official plan, and the cultural heritage character area approach was determined to be the most appropriate tool. This is a tool that city staff use in other areas, in particular the Village of Richmond and also within Sandy Hill. And next slide, please. And Eric, if you just click it one more time, actually, there are 2 points there. And one more time, please. Thank you. So recommendation 2 is to adopt the Veterans Housing Character Area Management Guidelines, which are contained in section 5 of document 3. So the function of these guidelines is to encourage conservation and provide guidance to help manage change within the area. It's important to note that these guidelines are not a heritage conservation district enabled under the Ontario Heritage Act. A heritage character area is implemented under provisions of the official plan, and heritage permits or other permissions are not required by the City of Ottawa within a character area. So the guidelines for the character area focus in specifically on some areas such as additions, new construction, and also landscapes. These proposed guidelines help to balance intensification with cultural heritage conservation and ensuring that owners can retain some of the flexibility to design and build additions to their homes that they currently enjoy. And next slide, please. So the next few slides just have some visualizations which kind of help explain some of the guidelines. So this image speaks to some of our guidance around front entrances in relation to new construction or alterations. So essentially through our analysis, we did determine that there is a very consistent ground floor height and orientation of buildings towards the street. So we have some guidance within the guidelines which speak to front entrances remaining oriented towards the street and building proportions remaining consistent, so things like ground floor height, etc. We also speak to the consistency of facade material across facades and maintaining some of the simple character of these buildings in both alterations and new construction. And next slide, please. So this next image speaks to some of the consistency of site layout within the area. So here you can see a current aerial image of Harold Place and the fire insurance plans for the site's original layout. So we have guidelines within the new guidelines which speak to new construction being built to approximately the same front yard setback as the lot's original dwelling, or at minimum maintaining the consistency that is established across those streets. So new single attached dwellings are encouraged to reflect the height, scale, and massing of existing dwellings in the character area. And new development should also incorporate green front yards and reflect the property's established spatial relationship with the street. And next slide, please. So recommendation 3 is to direct staff to undertake monitoring for a period of 3 years and to report back to the Build Heritage Subcommittee on the outcomes of the management guidelines associated with the Veterans Housing Character Area. So monitoring may consider things such as the built form outcomes, resident perceptions, and then also staff perceptions. So that is heritage staff, but also our colleagues within planning services and building services. After the 3-year period, we're intending to report back to Build Heritage Subcommittee on the outcomes of the monitoring period, and the results of this monitoring may lead to further staff recommendations for changes to the character area guidelines or the adoption of new or revised heritage conservation strategies. And next slide, please. So I do want to speak briefly to why we are not recommending an HCD. So staff look closely at a number of mechanisms, including both heritage conservation districts and cultural heritage character areas. Both of these tools recognize collective value and use guidelines to manage change. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, conservation districts are a very well-known tool. Historic research revealed to us that the builders and the intentions of these original homes were for them to be altered and grow over time to meet the needs and changing needs of residents. in response to the dramatic housing requirements of the post-war period. So the cultural heritage character area under the official plan ensures that helps ensure that heritage conservation and commemoration are integrated within planning processes, but also offers a lot of flexibility in terms of permitting and working with and managing change. So staff considered the HCD to be a little bit more restrictive and not appropriate at this time. And in particular, this was also reflective of some of the consultation that we had with area residents. So our concern in this area is more about conserving the area's character and built form, and less about overseeing specific details of specific interventions, such as changes to windows or siding, which are often some details that are reflective more of the requirements of an HCD versus a character area. So this is a tool that's been used in other areas of the city, such as Sandy Hill and also the Village of Richmond. And through its integration within existing planning and development processes, we've seen some success with examples of sensitive infill and compatible alterations to existing buildings. And next slide, please. Recommendation 4 is to direct staff in consultation with the community and the ward councillor to coordinate the design and installation of commemorative installations or interpretive signage within the character area. So this may include things like custom street sign blades, and there's an example here from New Edinburgh. So this is a pretty common approach within the city, as well as interpretive signage boards, plaques, or other commemorative installations as suggested by the community or staff. And next slide, please. And finally, recommendation 5 is a 2-part recommendation. So this is basically to direct staff to look at 2 properties which were given some consideration throughout the study process. So first is to direct staff to evaluate 1 Harold Place, which is Harold Place Park, for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So Harold Place Park is a really well-known destination in the veterans housing subdivisions. And it was named in memory of Ernest William Harold, who was a local man who reported for the Ottawa Citizen in 1913 and went overseas to serve in the First World War. His death coincided with the construction of Veterans Housing Project number 1, and the park was named in his memory. The park and the associated street have a very iconic dog bone shape, and it's located right in the heart of the Veterans subdivision. So it's a very popular gathering place and the site of many community events. And next slide, please. The second property is 915 Maryville Road, which is currently the St. Teklehemena Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This is a church that was originally designed by modernist architect James Strutt in 1959 and features a pretty iconic A-frame form. So it's a very recognizable building along Maryville Road, and staff identified it as a building worth further consideration for designation through the study process. And next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it back over to Avery, who's going to talk about some of the policy frameworks and notification.
Thank you, Greg. The recommendations in this report are consistent with the provincial policy statement, and they conform to the city's previous official plan, our council approved new official plan, as well as the Maryville Road North Community Design Plan, various urban design guidelines, as well as the high performance development standards. Next slide, please. In addition to notices, so notification, in addition to notices mailed out to owners and residents of we also did several public information sessions. We also contacted Heritage Ottawa, the Carlington Community Association, the Strutt Foundation, and the ward councillor, informing them of this report and its recommendations. Next slide, please. So for next steps, the report is anticipated at Planning Committee on April 28th, and then rises to Council for May 11th. If it were to be approved, the guidelines would take immediate effect. A notice would be mailed to residents and stakeholders, informing them of the character area and its guidelines. Information about the character area and guidelines would then be made available on Ottawa Dossier and through the project's e-newsletter. Our team, our heritage planning staff, would then connect with Building Code Services and Development Review, our colleagues there, and begin to implement the guidelines. So ideally, this would be brought on to projects early and connecting with applicants at that time. Staff would then track the performance of the guidelines and report back in 3 years' time. Next slide, please. This is our final slide. In closing, the staff recommend the approval of each of the recommendations in this report. This would achieve the goals of the study. The creation of the Veterans Housing Character Area and the associated commemoration strategy will ensure that the historical significance of the Veterans Housing subdivisions is recognized and remembered. Greg and I would be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you so much, Greg and Avery, for the really in-depth presentation on the heritage study. And I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Emma Donens as well, the intern who did a tremendous amount of work on this report. Much appreciated. We did receive correspondence, two letters of correspondence on this item, one from a resident and one also from David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa, both in support. And we also have Mr. Fleming listed as a registered speaker. So if Mr. Fleming is available and wants to speak to this item, he will have 5 minutes.
Hello?
And yes, and you can go ahead, Mr. Fleming.
Okay, sorry, I thought I was muted.
No problem.
Heritage Ottawa is pleased to support this initiative by the city's Heritage Planning section. We support the staff recommendations for the creation of the Veterans Housing Character Area and the pursuant management guidelines. Although we strongly support the need for the creation of the character area and understand staff's explanation for taking this approach, this excellent report on the research and extensive community consultation begs the question, why not just propose the area's designation as a heritage conservation district immediately rather than delaying it? The spirit of the city's new official plan would certainly permit the establishment of an HCD based on the work done to date. And further delay, we fear, might jeopardize the chances of such designation as the various developmental aspects of the new official plan are implemented and interpreted by planning tribunal challenges. Nevertheless, this is a job well done and staff should be congratulated for their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I do not see any hands raised for questions. So thank you, Mr. Fleming. Does the committee have any questions for staff? And I do see that member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Sorry, Chair, I would just like to make a comment after with the staff leave because I don't have any questions for staff. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. The next person with their hand raised is member Conforti.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just actually had a question. I was very pleased to see that the church designed by James Strutt is being proposed for designation. And I was just wondering if staff has been in contact yet or plans to be in contact with the Strutt Foundation, because they have quite a great presence in the community, and I'm sure they would be very happy to help.
Yes, I can confirm. We contacted the Strutt Foundation a while back, and we're very pleased to hear from them. And they've submitted some documentation and information from the archives as well to support the research. So we're looking forward to learning more about the building. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Councillor Gower has his hand raised as well.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I don't have questions, but a few comments. I found this to be a very, very interesting report. Really enjoyed reading it. I wanted to thank Councillor Brockington, who was kind enough to give me a tour of this neighborhood last fall or last summer, several months ago. It is a really, really unique neighborhood in the city of Ottawa. And I'm glad to see the recommendations from staff on this. Also glad to see the collaboration between the Councillor Brockington and his team, as well as the community associations. And I think it really, that collaboration is resulting in these good recommendations and the outcome that meets the study objectives. There was one line in the report that I think it's worth highlighting, because it's on, let's see, page 8, I think, of the report, that in the historical research, staff determined or discovered that these original homes were designed to be altered and to grow over time, addressing both the national housing crisis of the immediate post-war era and the changing needs of area residents. And I love that connection, the housing crisis of 60 years ago and the connection now to the housing crisis that we're in now. And I think that the context of the current housing crisis has really affected or shaped some of the recommendations that we're seeing from staff here. So well done to everyone who had a hand in this. And I think it's a great model of engagement and of, I guess, a good solution for recognizing and encouraging heritage protection and conservation going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower, for those excellent comments. And I see that Councillor Brockington, the ward councillor, has his hand raised.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Gower and others, for your comments. Indeed, it's been very interesting working with staff and reading the research. I've had the pleasure to not just serve this community as a city councillor, but as a school board trustee, and learn about the history is absolutely fantastic. I'll start with my question, Chair. Staff, in your list of recommendations, you recommend that we monitor for 3 years, a period of 3 years, and report back. Listening to the delegation, that suggests perhaps a greater, not urgency, that's not the right word, but not waiting. Could staff just explain the 3-year recommendation, and would it make sense to perhaps strike a balance? And I still think monitoring is important, so I'm not suggesting we throw that out, but would staff live with something like a 2-year period? If you would please reply.
So through the chair, we settled on a 3-year monitoring period just because a lot of associated planning policies within the city are in a period of transition at this point. We do have a new official plan that's coming into place, and then also eventually the new zoning bylaw will be in development. So we think that the 3-year period is appropriate just to see how those policies that are associated with this begin to integrate within the with the Veterans Housing Character Guidelines. So it's staff's position at this point that a 3-year period is appropriate for that monitoring. We think it gives the development community, residents, and also our other staff at the city appropriate amount of time to begin to learn how to engage with these guidelines and integrate them into planning processes.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate that. Chair, do you mind if I just provide closing comments and then I won't need to speak again?
Not at all.
I think, thanks, Chair. I think this is an excellent example of not just the work that our staff have done, but the recommendations that strike a balance between recognizing the historical significance of a neighborhood or a community, encouraging conservation, and providing guidelines to homeowners and residents in the area. And you may say, well, Riley, if we don't designate this a heritage area, won't there be rampant teardowns? Simply go to this area. It's an area that's 75 years old and the veteran houses still stand. Some have been altered, as Councillor Gower just mentioned, as families expanded, as new homeowners have moved in. These aren't big homes, 900,000, 1,100 square feet. They are not big homes to begin with, lots of land. But this is an area that basically has been preserved. Yes, there have been some modifications. This strikes the balance that the community wanted. The community wanted that recognition that this is a historical district, but also that gives homeowners some flexibility on their properties and to their homes. So I think this is really the best outcome that we could have got through this process. So again, to staff who have been engaged and to the public who also came out and provided comments, I just think that it's been 75 years. So thankfully we can pass this and council will pass this and the area will be acknowledged for its historical significance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington, for both your questions to staff and your comments as ward councillor concerning this report. I see that Member Hassel has raised her hand.
Yes, one quick question on the monitoring through you, Chair. Do you have by chance specific targets that you're going to be looking at when you're monitoring? And if so, have these been developed again in consultation with the community, or are you going to start developing those after this report moves forward?
Through the chair, we have a bit of a basic framework for what we want to look at in terms of valuation. So the built form outcomes that occur over the next 3 years, we want to engage with residents again over the next 3 years as well to get a sense of resident perception and opinion on how the guidelines are working and how they've been implemented, and then also with our colleagues in different city departments. But a specific monitoring plan is still to be developed after this.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. And before we go to Barry, I did have a question. I know that Barry wanted to have some wrap-up comments. So maybe if he permits me, I'll just ask a quick question, or at least allude to one, because I think the question that Vice Chair Quinn had, unfortunately, obviously she gave regrets today, but she did want staff to elaborate on the reasons why they do not believe Carlington North Veterans Housing merits designation as a heritage conservation district under the Ontario Heritage Act. I would just say that I thought that there was a very in-depth explanation during the staff report. So I don't think I'll re-ask that specific question, but she did make a very interesting point that there seemed to be some confusion over the difference between an HCD and an HCA, and that the city website does not elaborate on those two differentiations. So I was just wondering if I could pose that to staff as to whether they would take as maybe informal direction to seek a little bit more clarity on the website about the difference between the character area study and the heritage conservation district plans.
Yes, through you, Chair. I think we can definitely make some updates for clarity to any of the information that's posted on the website. I think that'll be beneficial for the community. So certainly we can do that.
Much appreciated, because I think in these types of scenarios as well, when character area studies are being undertaken, it might provide a little bit more clarity to residents, so they have a better perspective, ideally, when they're dealing with members of council or others around these specific files. So I do very much appreciate the fact that you'll look into creating a little bit more clarification on the website. And now to Barry, who's had his hand raised for a little while.
Thank you, Chair. I have 4 brief points for comments. The first is that I would really like to compliment the staff and the community councillor for collaborating in development of this heritage character study. Second point is that I support the staff recommendations. The third point is just to bring to our attention that this is the second step in the recognition of mid-century modern architecture in Ottawa as having heritage potential. We had our Briarcliff Heritage Conservation District designated several years ago, which was the first step. And I think that we owe recognize that the city program of work really now has in front of it the investigation and evaluation of mid-century modern architecture throughout the city. So this is a step in that direction, and I hope that we will be able to move forward with that in either the last quarter of this year or early the next term of council. The fourth and final point is that while I really do admire the research that was done, I think that there should be a follow-up period of research and writing, and I don't suggest that the staff do this, but maybe collaborate with the universities in Ottawa. And that is that this Carlington Veterans Housing Project is very much part of a huge wave of post-war veterans housing that was built across the country. I know there are some references to one other city, but here in Ottawa, for instance, in 1948, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, previously Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation, built 404 walk-up apartment units. It was called the Mann Avenue Project, now called Strathcona Heights, which the City of Ottawa Nonprofit Housing Corporation owns and manages. In the 1980s, I was the master planner to conserve and intensify this site. And I think that referring to the walk-up apartment veterans housing projects in Ottawa and also the other ones across the country will help frame the context of the value of this heritage conservation area. I think also the future researchers should look at what are called the PMQs. It's a term that those who were children of the Canadian military would recognize, which I'm not, by the way. But these are the married quarters housing built on Canadian bases across the country in the early 1950s. These thousands and thousands, and they look exactly like the Carlington houses and laid out in the same way. So I think that there is really room here for helping Ottawans understand our city and our heritage if further work is done to link the research that's been done already to the larger movements of post-war housing and modernism. Sorry for taking so long, Chair, but I thought that I would just add that as context. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was very insightful and very much appreciated by myself and I imagine by all the other members of the subcommittee. So colleagues, approval is sought to establish the Veterans Housing Character Area and adopt area guidelines for the community of about 400 homes, 400 houses south of Carling Avenue between Fisher Avenue and Maryvale Road. While we heard that the area does not merit designation as a heritage conservation district under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act at this time, what we have before us is a report that outlines and documents a relatively intact example of a planned neighborhood built at the end of the Second World War for war workers and veterans. Establishing this cultural heritage character area and guidelines would help ensure the community's heritage value is conserved and commemorated. As a consequence, I'm glad to support staff recommendations and would like to thank staff once again for their hard work on this heritage study. Do any other members have any more comments on this specific item? And I don't see any other hands raised. So firstly, is the motion brought forward by Councillor Brockington carried?
Carried.
And is the main report carried?
Carried.
Carried. This report is scheduled to be presented to Planning Committee on April 28th. The next item on our agenda is an application to alter 392 Ashbury Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Can staff please provide an overview of this report?
Good morning, everyone. So I'm here today to present on the application to alter 392 Ashbury Road. as mentioned, it's a property located in Rockcliffe Park and designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So next slide, please. So just to give some context, the property is located on the south side of Ashbury Road between Acacia Avenue and Glenwood Avenue to the east of Ashbury College. And next slide, please. So here's an aerial image which just showcases some more of the current conditions. So again, located about mid-block on Ashbury Road on the south side between Glenwood and Acacia. And next slide, please. So here's a photo that illustrates the existing conditions of the dwelling. So this property is identified as a grade 1 property in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District, and it's undergone several alterations over the last 10 to 15 years. As you can see in the front, there is currently a fairly prominent semicircular driveway, as well as some mature vegetation and large hedges which surround the property. And next slide, please. And then just for some additional context, this is a sketch showing the size of the existing dwelling as well as the existing semicircular driveway. And next slide, please. And just to help illustrate some of the existing character, I've just highlighted a few of the features of the property. So the red dotted line indicates a low flagstone wall which surrounds the property, and within that there are hedges which also surround the property. So these flagstone walls are a fairly characteristic element of Rockcliffe Park. The blue circle just highlights the existing semicircular driveway at the front of the property, and the orange circle behind the house highlights an existing rear concrete deck. And next slide, please. So this is the plan which showcases the proposed alterations, and there's a few key items that are proposed. So first is the construction of a single-story addition to the east of the existing dwelling. Second is the construction of a detached two-car garage further east of the dwelling. And third is the removal of the semicircular driveway and the installation of a new driveway associated with the proposed garage. In addition, a new in-ground pool is proposed in the rear, as well as internal walkways and new planting beds throughout the property. This proposal conforms to all zoning requirements for the area, including lot coverage, floor space index, height, and front, rear, and side yard setbacks. Therefore, no additional planning approvals are required. However, building permits, as with most projects of this nature, in addition to a private approach permit for the new driveway, will be required. Next slide, please. So just to highlight further and help illustrate this a little bit better, I've highlighted some of the different things that are happening on this property. So the yellow areas highlight the new single-story addition and detached garage. The blue highlights the proposed pool in the rear, and the red circle highlights the location of the former semicircular driveway, which is proposed to be removed. And as I go through the next few slides, I'm just going to comment on the applicability of the Rockcliffe Park HCD guidelines to this proposal. So next slide, please. So this image shows the illustrated landscape plan. To note, the applicant is proposing to remove 2 trees to permit the creation of the new driveway, and those are highlighted on the plan there. In accordance with the policies of the HCD plan, 2 replacement trees are proposed, one in the front and one in the rear. So landscape guidelines in the Rockcliffe Park HCD plan speak to new buildings and additions respecting the heritage attributes of the lot's existing hard and soft landscape. The proposed addition and detached garage are designed to sit within a green park-like landscape, enhanced by the removal of the existing semicircular driveway and the addition of soft landscaping throughout the front yard. The addition and garage are further screened by the existing low stone wall and shrubs, which are retained as part of this proposal. And next slide, please. So this image is a rendering of the proposal as viewed from Ashbury Road. As you can see, the proposed single-story addition is subordinate to the existing dwelling and clad in a white stucco that matches the dwelling's primary material. In line with the HCD plan, the addition is designed to be contemporary and of its own time, and is set back from the front of the existing dwelling. You can also see here the alterations to the landscape, including the removal of the existing semicircular driveway and the reintegration of that front area with the remainder of the streetscape. And next slide, please. So this is another angle from the front of the property. This highlights the enhanced streetscape continuity established by the removal of the semicircular driveway and the creation of new planting beds. The proposed planting reflects the informal park-like setting and characteristics of Rockcliffe Park, and the setback of the garage reduces the visual impact to the streetscape of the new structure. So from this angle, the garage is actually not visible as it's set back further from the new addition. And next slide, please. So this rendering shows the proposed garage. So the existing stone wall, which is altered slightly to permit the continuity of the driveway, and the hedges and as well as the new planting in the front yard help to screen the new garage. They also help to enhance the streetscape continuity of the property and also contribute to maintaining and reflecting the park-like setting of the HCD. So next slide, please. And this is just another angle from the front, which showcases the relationship between the addition and the garage, as well as some of the landscaping features of the property. And next slide. Just another angle here. Important to note that the applicant has made some alterations to the driveway, which help to increase the amount of soft landscaping on the property and also further screen that garage from the streetscape. And next slide, please. So finally, this rendering shows the rear of the property. So to the left is the existing concrete deck, which is to be retained, and additional planting contributes to maintaining the green setting for the property. The rear of the new addition is clad in a metal cladding, which is complementary to some of the material featured on the primary dwelling. And next slide, please. So just to summarize, some of the applicable policies within the Rockcliffe Park HCD plan include the different guidelines for conservation and maintenance, including those related to verandas, porches, canopies, as there is a small canopy proposed over the central front entrance, which reflects a previous canopy that was once on the building. 7.33, the various landscape guidelines in the HCD plan. And then 7.41, which speaks to alterations and additions to existing buildings, 7.42 for garages and accessory buildings, and 7.43 for landscape guidelines for new buildings and additions, and a full chart which details the compliance of the proposal with that of the HCD plan is included within the report. Next slide, please. So finally, just in summation in relation to the HCD guidelines, the addition is complementary and subordinate to the existing dwelling and compatible with adjacent dwellings on Ashbury Road. The landscape alterations enhance the character and visual continuity of the streetscape and conserve features such as the low stone wall and hedges. And alterations and new structures such as the garage are sensitively integrated to maintain the green park-like character of the lot and ensure that there's a dominance of soft landscaping across the property. And next slide, please. Finally, just to reference the standards and guidelines, standards 1 and 11 are applicable here. And next slide, please. In terms of consultation, so the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association Heritage Committee was consulted with as part of the pre-consultation pilot program. The RPRA Heritage Committee has noted concerns with the amount of new hard landscaping associated with the addition and the garage. Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application. The ward councillor is also aware of the application, and neighbors within 30 meters of the subject property were notified. And next slide, please. So finally, we have 3 recommendations for this report. First is to approve the application for alterations to 392 Ashbury Road, which includes the construction of a single-story addition and detached garage according to plans submitted and dated February 26, 2022, as well as landscape alterations according to plans submitted on March 9th, 2022. And then second and third are 2 standard recommendations. So first, to delegate authority for minor design changes to planning staff, and third, to issue the heritage permit with a 2-year expiry date. And next slide, please. So that includes my overview of this project. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee or anybody else. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Greg, for that very in-depth presentation. We did receive 4 pieces of correspondence on this file. that provide both comments and one letter that did register some concerns. We do have a number of registered speakers, so I don't know. Okay, just was checking to see with Councillor Brockington whether he had an issue on procedure. Probably not. So we'll just proceed here with our registered speakers, and the first registered speaker is Scott Hayward from Simmons Architecture.
Good morning, Chair and council members and attendees. And thanks, Greg, for the presentation. I really won't take much of your time. I think Greg did a really good job of encompassing the intent of the design and the features of what we're attempting to do with the site. I think one area I will mention is that the elimination of the circular driveway along Ashbury, I think is a crucial element in regaining the landscape quality of the property itself. And I think that's something that we really stressed strongly. And the amount of planting will also be increased. So I think the design, although it does increase the built and hardscaped area, will appear actually quite sensitive and in keeping with the surrounding environment and streetscape. There's been one letter, I just want to correct, one letter mentioned approximately 1/5 of the current property being hardscaped or landscaped, hardscaped or built upon. And you mentioned the increase was going to go to 4/5. That is not a correct number. Between the existing design as currently found on site and our proposed design, there's an increase of about 15% in hard landscaping and the built roofscape, so to speak. And that also includes the pool. So we've tried to, and that's that's the overall property, plus the strip of city property along the street. So as an overall whole, the building or the site is actually being increased with hard landscaping or roof or built landscaping by approximately 15%. So there's we've tried to balance removing hard landscaping or hard surfacing and adding landscaping wherever possible. I would also like to mention briefly that during the approval process, we presented to the Rockcliffe Residents Association. However, at the time of submitting, we had not heard any comments back from them. So the comments that we did receive after, we would love to have had the opportunity to review with them, but couldn't because of the lateness of the response. That's pretty well it, I think. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Hayward. And there is a question from Councillor Brockington to you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hayward, we are in receipt of 2 written letters from abutting property owners at 383 Maple and 387 Maple that contend that part of the proposed iron fence is actually on their property and not the property in question. Can you provide some insight on these claims and how this is going to be resolved with those 2 homeowners?
In reference to those letters, we based our design on a survey that we received. So what we've done is basically wrapped the perimeter of the property and the existing stone wall on the outside of the wall, so to speak, with that fence. I would propose going onto the site with the survey, reviewing exactly where the property stakes are, and if the property line does carry over the existing stone wall, then I would propose to move the fence to the inside face of that stone wall, that existing stone wall. So right now there's stone wall, it's sort of hidden behind a whole row of cedar hedges, which are probably about 10 feet high. So I would locate the proposed fence between the 2 of them and not to the outside of the stone wall. So I think it's a relatively easy fix that would ensure that the fencing would be on our client's property and not on an adjacent property.
So just to confirm, you are going to clarify?
Yes, we will. Yeah,
okay,
I'll go with that. Yeah.
The property lines. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions for Mr. Haywood, so thank you for your deputation. The next registered speaker is Shane English.
Thank you, Chair. I'm one of the property owners along with my wife, Paula Enright. We simply just wanted to first off thank the Heritage Department and the work of Greg and his team and this committee for reviewing the proposed alterations to our property, which is an exciting adventure for our family, and simply here to answer questions that may arise as part of that process. Thank you.
We appreciate your presence, and I do not see any hands raised for specific questions for you, Mr. English. So thank you for appearing here today. The next registered speaker is David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heritage Ottawa is pleased to comment on this application. The existing building is a good example of a symmetrical, modern international architectural style and has been rated as a Grade 1 property in the Heritage Conservation District. The proponents attempt to build an addition which is compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from the original is made more difficult by having the addition on the side, thus detracting from the simple symmetry of the existing house. We do note, however, that the design guidelines for the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District permits side lot additions as long as they do not encroach on the open spaces, which are a significant cultural heritage attribute of the property. Limiting these open spaces is the new hardscaping that is reflected in this proposal. Although patios and pools are not uncommon to additions in the Heritage Conservation District, their size in relation to the size of the property should not be permitted at the expense of the existing green space. The proponent should be congratulated for proposing compatible building materials for this thoughtfully designed addition to this mid-20th century property. A reduction of the property's 4/5 proportion of structure and hardscaping, as noted by the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association, would, in our opinion, improve the overall design and make it more compatible with the HCD guidelines. We were encouraged that the architect mentioned today that the additional hardscaping only amounts to another 15%. So this is certainly encouraging, but overall we support this. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Fleming, and I don't see any hands raised for questions, so thank you very much. Our next registered speaker is Michael O'Sullivan.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this morning. I'm the owner of 383 Maple Lane, which shares a boundary with the applicant's property of 392 Ashbury Road. On reviewing the plans following the notice provided to us on the 29th of March by the Heritage Subcommittee, it was apparent that a significant section of the proposed 5-foot iron fence pool surround has been mistakenly located for construction on our property. Our property was surveyed in 2019 by Stantec Geomatics, and the survey pins were re-established by the Ontario Certified Surveyors to mark the boundary. All survey pins were photographed at that point in time, and then following the survey, we constructed a fence within our property. The fence was located away from the shared wall, which is the boundary between the two properties, to allow access for the maintenance of the shared low stone wall boundary and the fence without the requirement to access the adjacent property. The 5-foot iron fence around the rear and sides of the property, as shown on the plans, is actually sited on our property and not on the applicant's property, and therefore the proposed fence needs to be resited, and the relevant setbacks to the new addition needs to be checked against the surveyed boundary to ensure they're compliant with current regulations. On receipt of the application, we reviewed the survey pin locations and noted that one of the survey pins had been removed. However, the original surveyor's marking paint remained, and photographs of the original pin and remaining paint were provided to the committee as a response on the 4th of April. Additionally, the landscape plan provided amidst a mature tree located on the boundary between our two properties. The mature tree on the shared boundary straddles the boundary and has been maintained and pruned in consultation between ourselves and the previous owners of 392 Maple Lane over the years. We do not agree to the felling of this tree and require the landscape plan to be adjusted. In 2021, when the applicants moved in onto the property, we spoke with them and explained that the wall was the shared boundary and that our fence had been constructed within our property and did not represent that boundary. The current plans will need to be adjusted to move the iron fence onto the applicant's property and to ensure the survival of our existing tree. A more fulsome response with photographs and plans was submitted to the Heritage Subcommittee on April the 4th. And basically, this is just a verbal statement to follow up what Councillor Brockington has already mentioned, that the fence will need to be moved onto the actual applicant's property rather than ourselves. Thank you for listening to me this morning.
Appreciate your comments, Mr. O'Sullivan, and thank you for appearing before the subcommittee. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you so much. And the next registered speaker is Michelle Heyman from Rockcliffe Park Residents Association Heritage Committee.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Heyman, and I'll make a brief statement based on our comments that were submitted with Heritage Report. This development includes a large addition, which doubles the floor footprint of the current home. It adds a new 2-car garage, a pool house, and a concrete pool deck, and several other paved areas and pathways. It also includes a new driveway, although this element has been mitigated by the removal of the existing circular driveway. This application takes a grade 1 property where structure and hardscape currently occupy roughly 1/5 of the lot to a proposed design where structure and hardscape would dominate roughly 4/5 of the lot. I asked that the landscape plan be put up, and this can be more easily demonstrated by seeing the landscape plan. I don't know if that's possible, but I'll continue.
Staff to do that if possible.
Okay, thank you. The addition and this construction fundamentally changes the streetscape and drastically reduces the green space and open lawn, which is one of the heritage characteristics of this lot and surrounding lots. It is inconsistent with the guidelines in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, which states that the dominance of soft landscape over hard landscape is an essential heritage attribute of the Heritage Conservation District and shall be retained in order to maintain a green setting for each property. Section 7.3.31. In this case, soft landscaping no longer dominates the property. And this is important not only from the streetscape, but also our property. Thank you. So you would be able to see there that the footprint is double. The addition appears on the right-hand side, and then the entire right-hand side of the lot is dominated by structure or hardscape, including the concrete existing pad and walkways. I had wanted to say that the hardscape, the dominance of hardscape and structure on this property was noted in previous comments with heritage staff and from the RPRA Heritage Committee. And during our comments, we had asked that throughout the property, the hardscape and built structure be reduced throughout the property. So it is appreciated that the circular driveway was removed. However, that does not accomplish further hardscape reduction throughout the property. Therefore, the RPRA Heritage Committee supports this approval because we do agree that the addition is subordinate and to the main property. But we would like, so we conditionally approve this in principle. However, we would like to ask the Built Heritage Conservation Committee that in addition to softening the edges of the hard landscaping through increased plantings that are proposed and the use of native species and the option for using natural flagstones and permeable pavers, that the Built Heritage Subcommittee require one or more of the following options be implemented to mitigate the impacts of the hard landscaping that now dominate this property. We asked for either the reduction in the scale and the mass of the addition, or significantly reducing the area of the rear concrete deck, and or significantly reducing the hard landscaping associated with the pool surround and the pool house. I would like to mention that we did have various conversations back and forth between the city and ourselves, and this remained something that we were not able to agree on. There is significant softscape that has been added. However, it doesn't change the amount of hardscape that has been added to this property. It merely softens it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I welcome any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for your deputation. I don't see any raised hands, but I know that you want, oh, I do see a raised hand. So Member Conforti does have a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And through you, Chair, Michelle, did you have a concern with the amount of hardscaping or the mitigation and the screening of it from the street? Because from the landscape plan, they do seem to be really making a solid effort to mitigate the impact from the street. And I'm just looking on Street View now, like, I guess I just wanted through you, Chair, just a clarification on the concern there.
Okay. Is it okay, Councillor? May I go ahead?
Absolutely. The question's for you.
Okay, thank you. So one of the important features of our conservation plan is the dominance of open green space. So the fact that and it's not just from the streetscape, but from the entire property. So that would include neighboring properties looking into the backyard and what their experience is also as they're living in the neighborhood. So the streetscape isn't the only thing that's important. While we recognize that the addition is appropriate in terms of being subordinate, that in conjunction with all the hardscaping and the garage and the pathways means that on the overall lot, not just from the streetscape, that hardscape and structure dominate this property. And the intent is, if the conservation plan is to preserve open green space. And we feel that this doesn't achieve it. Does that answer the question, or would you like for me to, are there more details that you would?
I think that answers Member Conforti's question, and these are some lines of questioning that I know we had a discussion, my office and the Residents Association had a discussion about this. So I will also be asking a line of questions around this with staff. So no, I do appreciate your submission today, and thank you so much for it. I don't see any other questions to Michelle, so thank you.
Thank you.
And so at this point, does the committee have any questions for staff? And I don't see any hands raised, but based on some of the discussions that I was holding in capacity as ward councillor with the Residents Association, I do want to ask for staff comments, basically referencing policy 7331, landscape guidelines, clause 1 of the Heritage Conservation Plan. And we know that it says in that policy that soft landscaping should dominate the property. So I'm just wondering what proportion of the property should be softscaped. Are there specific quantitative specifications that speak to this?
So through you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan doesn't specify any specific requirements in terms of numbers or anything like that, or targets for what is considered soft landscaping dominating the property. Essentially, it is a contextual assessment based on the character of the property, the size of the property, and the different landscape elements associated with that property. And it's staff's opinion that this proposal is consistent with this guideline, and that's primarily achieved through, one, the removal of that semicircular driveway and the reintegration of a more consistent streetscape across the front of the property, but also through the integration of different plant beds and other soft landscaping throughout the property.
Okay. So staff comments concerning the pathways and driveways include that porous or permeable paving materials such as turf stone would be preferable to impervious flagstones, concrete slabs, or asphalt paving. Do the attributes of materials used for pathways and driveways factor into the proportion of hardscape versus softscape discussion? So in other words, do permeable paving materials constitute softscaping?
Through Chair, no, not generally. The sort of only, I think, half measure between that is something like a stepping stone paver, which inherently has more of a grass or landscape quality around it. But a material such as a porous paver is still a example of hard landscaping.
Okay. And staff has said that adding plantings at the edge of hardscape somehow alleviates the amount of hardscape, or is it that added plantings ultimately enhance the established landscape character of the streetscape per se, contributes to soft landscaping in front yards, or enhances the public-facing landscaping to further contribute to the park-like landscape character per policy?
Through your Chair, and apologies if I'm not answering the question to the extent that you're looking for there. But I think that all of those strategies you mentioned are potential options, both for mitigating the impacts of hard landscaping, but also for adding in additional soft landscaping. So what the applicant's done here with the additional planting does help to screen some of the impacts of proposed hard landscaping across the property, and also does add in additional informal planting, which is very characteristic of the Rockcliffe Park HCD throughout the property in places where those were not previously present.
Okay. I guess the challenge that I think the Residents Association, other abutting residents are having is really around definitions, whether they're quantitative or qualitative. I guess basic questions around what comprises softscape, what comprises hardscape. Is it as simple as softscape equaling vegetation or other naturally occurring ground covering such as wood chips, and whether hardscape is just man-made materials or just man-made materials that are not permeable? So is it possible that we can work with the Resident Association, especially in the future, to create working definitions of these terms to utilize in ongoing applications and future interpretations of the Heritage Conservation District Plan, since there doesn't seem to be clarity in terms of what these terms represent to residents in the Residents Association when they're deliberating and talking to staff about these applications?
I think I will pass that one over to Anne if possible, just given the kind of longer term impacts of a question like that.
Thank you, Chair King. I think that the Heritage staff have worked pretty extensively with the RPRA on the definitions in the Rockcliffe plan, and I'm fairly confident to this point that we've worked with them, but we could take informal direction to continue those conversations.
I would appreciate that, because based on the conversations that I've had before, there isn't that uniformity in terms of interpretation. And I think that that's absolutely important as we go forward with the Residents Association and their discussions on files. I think there needs to be clarity around hardscape and softscape. So I would definitely appreciate a continued dialogue on this specific element of the plan with the community. I'll leave it. I think I will leave it there. No, sorry, did you have another?
Sure. Thanks, Chair King. I was just going to mention that the plan itself is a qualitative document. It's not quantitative in the sense of the zoning bylaw providing those hard detailed numbers like something like lot coverage per se. And the HCD plan an HCD plan will likely never provide that kind of quantitative direction. So we can we can work within the framework of that conversation for sure. But for example, this property, and Greg can speak to the numbers, but for the zoning bylaw, I think the lot coverage is about, the maximum would be 33%. And what the applicant is proposing is around 21%. So there is a number that can be applied to the zoning bylaw, but it, like Greg eloquently described, using the HCD plan, it's a qualitative assessment.
Okay, I appreciate that, because there was obviously some quantitative numbers in some of the correspondence, but obviously we want to reach a level, at least in terms of interpretation, of clarity when the Residents Association are around the table with city staff or with applicants. So I think it will behoove us to have those discussions. And my office would look forward to participating in such discussions, so that we can just have clarity when the Residents Association or when residents are before us. I see that Councillor Moffat has his hand raised.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Just curious on this one. I don't recall. I mean, the Ottawa Built Heritage Advisory Committee was seemingly so long ago, but did this building come up at OBHAC before? I can't help but notice reading the heritage survey prepared by Heather Pro, and there's a significant difference between the building as it stood in 2010 to what we're talking about today. There's also been major changes to this building over the years leading up to 2010, with the side addition, the rear addition, the conversion of the garage. But I'm just curious that the change of the front facade, which seems significant from what was there just 10 years ago, would that have come through OBHAC at the time? And was that circulated? Was that, I mean, there's big change then. I mean, it was shortly after that the semicircle driveway was put in as well. And a significant amount of tree removal back at that same time. So what happened then?
Through the chair, based on my research into this property, it looks like most of those alterations that you're speaking of were undertaken without a heritage permit at the time. And I wasn't part of staff at that time, but I believe it may have also been during some of the transitional periods between the former Rockcliffe Park HCD plan and the current Rockcliffe Park HCD plan. So some of those alterations were likely undertaken without permission, I think, by a previous owner. And may be able to fill in some additional details there on some of the history on this file.
Thank you through you, Chair and Councillor Moffat. Greg's summary is about all the details that I have as well. It hasn't come in front of committee, I would say, in the past 8 to 10 years, and I don't know if it did before that. And I think Greg's correct that some work did happen without a heritage permit in the past, and there's been some alterations, including the ones that you noted.
Yeah, it just seems that they just predate the existence of our committee in 2012. It was just a curiosity. I mean, the application in front of us, obviously, with the removal of the semicircle driveway and a reinstatement of what the front landscaping was. Obviously, it's a big change with the hardscaping and the addition, but as was noted by Greg, it's permitted with the zoning. So, no, I was just curious about that. I think this is not the same building that was built in 1950. It's not the same building that was altered in the 1980s, and it's not the same building that was altered just over 10 years ago. So there's been big changes to this property over the years. But I think what we're seeing now, at least on the streetscape side, is an improvement on what was done just 10 years ago. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Do we have any more questions for staff on this issue? And I don't see any hands raised. So do any of the members have any comments on this item? And I see that Member Podolsky has raised his hand.
Yes, Chair King, just 3 short points. The first is a reminder to the public and my colleagues here on the committee and staff that this building constructed in 1950, albeit having changed, is of the same vintage as the North Carlington Heritage Conservation Area that we just saw on the last agenda item, and it's worth reflecting on conditions at that time in the late 40s and 50s that had veterans housing built on Carling Avenue and new houses, modest size, built in the privileged area of Rockcliffe. It's just worth thinking about that. The second is that my point is that I think the architect has done an excellent job in respecting the existing house and creating an addition that is compatible, meeting standards and guidelines of historic places in Canada. And the final point, or second final point, is I support the application and the staff recommendation. And the last point is that I would like staff to reconsider the use of the term, in its own time as a attribute of the additions that is often accompanied in various staff reports. The reason being is that this building, built in 1950s in the international style, and the additions really are inspired not so much by 2022, but by the great architecture of Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, and Marcel Breuer, who pioneered in the 1920s the language that Chris is using today. This is a compliment to the architect's work, but I think that the character of the building additions that you see really precede the design of what we have as the home here. And I think that it's worth rethinking for public education purposes the use of the term in its own time. So with that comment, I will support the application. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I see that Member Conforti has raised her hand.
Thank you. Yes, and I got kicked off at technical issues, so hopefully we're still talking about the house on Ashbury because I did have some comments. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just had a few comments and really just wanted to compliment the architect for the work that they did, because I think it's a challenge when you have an international style house like this that doesn't necessarily, the style of the house doesn't necessarily go with the characteristics of Rockcliffe Park, with the park-like setting. And just some of the comments about the hardscaping and the softscaping. There's grass right now, so yeah, technically that's softscaping, but it's pretty austere, and that goes with the style. So I think it's definitely a challenge to marry the softscaping, in the park-like setting of Rockcliffe with this international style house. So I think they did a great job, and I'll be supporting this. Application as well.
Thank you for those comments. I don't see any hands raised, so in capacity of ward councillor, I'll just make a few closing comments. While I'll hesitantly support this report, I do have significant concerns, as I would agree that a reduction of the property's proportion of structure and hardscaping, as noted by the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association, would improve the overall design, despite the fact that there are no quantified requirements, as we heard from staff. I think in the future, it'll be important for city staff and residents to work together to clarify the interpretation of the Heritage Conservation District guidelines concerning softscaping and hardscaping characteristics with the community to ensure that the applications submitted in the future have more delineated definitions, especially in the absence of quantified requirements. I do have to agree with the Residents Association's observations that it does seem counterproductive to have a HCD plan. They're in place to protect green space, primarily designed to protect a community in a park-like setting, but not really clearly define the amounts of green space or soft spacing per application. So I think that does warrant more discussion, and I'm pleased that staff has committed to ensure that it does have a continuing dialogue with the community association so that we can get towards a clearer delineation of those definitions and ideally even amounts. So I'm pleased that we will ensure that there will be those dialogues. But despite that, as I said, I'll hesitantly support this report. So is the report carried?
Carried.
Carried. This report is scheduled to be presented to council and council on April 27th. The third item is the Heritage Register Annual Report 2021. There is no presentation on this item, but we have received correspondence from Kabir Udin Kabar, and there is a speaker registered on their behalf, Gaetano Idon. So I don't know if our registered speaker is with us, but they have 5 minutes to address the subcommittee on this item.
The speaker should be joining momentarily, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I see that you have unmuted, so you do have 5 minutes to address the subcommittee.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
please
good
go
afternoon.
ahead.
Good morning, Chair. How are you today?
Good. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm representing Mr. Kabir. This was brought to me at last minute, but I suggested he hires counsel. We have called counsel, and we're going to be hiring. He's going to be hiring a Mr. Roberto Alberto from Gowlings. That's the best way. My suggestion is to have counsel represent him and overview the file, and that way you can get the best representation possible. I spoke with Eric yesterday evening, and I was hoping that the matter could be adjourned, please, so that Mr. Alberto can overview everything and he can address the committee at the time. Hello?
Yes. And so is that your statement to subcommittee?
Yes. Mr. Kabir is sitting here with me actually, and he agrees with what I suggested to him.
Yes.
He wants to hire counsel to represent him.
And so that is to seek a removal of his specific property from the Heritage Register.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
Do you know these?
Okay. So I don't see any other questions for you. So thank you for. Oh, I do see a question from Councillor Moffat.
Why should it be removed from the register?
Are you asking me this? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So Councillor Moffat is asking you a question.
I'm not in any position to answer any questions, to be quite honest with you. I'm not familiar with the matter very much. That's why Mr. Kabir's best representation would be through counsel. And he is going to be hiring counsel. And at that time, if you can just adjourn the meeting, you can address those matters at that time, please.
Well, this isn't a legal proceeding where we adjourn until you bring a new lawyer in. If you want, this is the opportunity today. If he's sitting right next to you, please enlighten the committee as to why you feel this property doesn't belong on a heritage register, which at the end of the day is just a register, and just means that if you want to tear your building down at some point, that it might be looked at over the course of 60 days to see if it warrants designation. So it seems wildly over the top to go out and seek legal counsel to review such a matter and ask for a deferral or a delay in the proceedings. So by all means, you have the opportunity today, right now, to talk to us about why you think this building, this property, I think there's more than one, shouldn't be on the Heritage Register. And if you have nothing to say, then we'll just move on.
So regarding it first, sir. He thought that it would be able to be handled today. I suggested he speaks with counsel. He wants to speak to counsel. We spoke with counsel this morning. And he also recommended it gets adjourned. Is that a problem, or? I don't see why that would be a problem.
So we have a specific process, and as Councillor Moffat had noted, this would be the opportunity for the resident with the property that is proposed to be placed on the Heritage Register to speak to the merits of that. And so at this point, if there are no other questions, I'll thank you for your submission.
Yeah, don't forget we're dealing with an elderly man. He's in his 80s, and he's not savvy technology. He needs good consult. So that's why I suggest to him he retains counsel.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your submission, and I will ask a question to staff concerning the potential of delaying this addition to the Heritage Register. So thank you so much.
Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly.
And I see that Councillor Brockington has raised his hand.
Thanks, Chair. Just within the same neighborhood as yourself, I think the report before us, though, is listing properties that are coming off, not necessarily those that are coming on. Am I incorrect in that? I'm just looking at the report before us. Can staff clarify?
Hello. Yes, I can answer that, speak to that. So the subject property at 160 Metcalfe is already listed on the Heritage Register. And the speaker was referring to the owner's request to remove it. So we've received a request from the owner to remove. Our team, we looked at the property and looked at its cultural heritage value, and we looked at the attributes visible on the exterior of the building. We looked at its location, and we looked at its historical associations, and determined that we continue to recommend that it stays listed on the Heritage Register and that it is not removed.
Okay, so the property in question that we just heard a delegation from is not before us today. The property owner can go through a normal process at any point throughout the year where they file an application to remove themselves, and staff deals with that. And that process can be done throughout the year, not just annually through an annual report like we're receiving now, correct?
So the request for removal, we only review them and bring them forward once a year. So so in the past, we've seen this owner can request removal annually. So it's an annual process. Phone conversations with the owner suggest to me that they are looking at potential demolition down the road. And so we've spoken about that, and the process to do so, as Councillor Moffat mentioned, is our 60-day process. So that would be filling out an online form, or we can work out a mailed form and submitting notice of intent to demolish. And then we would go through the procedures in place for that at that time.
Okay. I'm just trying to save some time. So how can the subcommittee today approve the report before us, but stick our foot in the door and allow due process to happen where the property owner can receive legal counsel and not make them wait an extra year to have an application heard? Meaning proceed with what the staff are recommending today, but also providing an opportunity within a reasonable time frame to deal with what we just heard today. I'm wondering if you or our own legal counsel could comment on that possibility. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I think I would get that by now. Mr. Chair, the due process today is to follow the process that's established. This is a property that already exists under the Heritage Register. If there is if legal counsel provides advice to move forward with a building permit application for demolition, that process is the only requirement here is notice to the municipality of the intent. This is not intended to be a punitive measure on the property or reflect anything in terms of the title of the property for a future sale. I can't provide the applicant with legal advice, but the report before you today is to deal with these properties that are before the committee on the removal from the Heritage Register. And that property at 160 Metcalf, I believe it is not listed on this report.
Fair enough. Whether or not that property owner may want to tear down and develop in the future, I think is one thing, but have they expressed intent to city staff that they also wanted to apply to remove themselves from the registry?
I believe I had heard Ms. Marshall say that they have reached out to city staff for a review, and that review has been conducted at this time, and that the recommendation from staff is not to remove it, which is why the property is not listed on this report, which is to remove properties today.
Okay, Ms. Etna, my last question to you is we heard from the delegate that they do want legal counsel to review the matter and are basically asking for, like I said, some sort of window or opportunity to revisit this and not have to wait a whole year. Is that a fair request, or do you believe we can still move forward and deal with them separately?
I would have to ask staff what the review process is. Right now, it's an annual review that's brought forward, but I know that we have done these on occasion where certain properties are looked at again upon the request or the direction of committee or council. So I would ask staff to speak about their process and their timeline. Mr. Chair, from a process perspective, I believe that this committee can certainly proceed with this report today, despite the request for an adjournment.
Yeah, I agree. And this is coming, Chair, this has to go through, is it planning committee and council, or does this go straight to council, or does it not move forward after here since it's an annual report? Where does it go next?
I'll ask staff there.
Chair,
Go ahead.
Chair, if I may, the report rises to council on April 27.
Chair, I would just ask, and maybe I can look to you for support, is that after today, staff reach out to the owner or the owner's rep of this building on Metcalf and try to have further discussion on this matter before it comes to council. I just want to see whether there's any additional progress on this file, whether the owner was able to get legal counsel and have made some sort of decision before it comes to council. I think rather than hold things up today, that would be the best thing for me if staff could just agree to reach out and see if they could have any further discussion.
I would agree and support that. Just in terms of process, I was just a little concerned when I was hearing about the lack of understanding about the process and how that might have impacted the timeline. So I would agree. I don't think that we would want to inhibit the movement of what's before us today, but we would obviously want to encourage staff to reach out to that resident and make inquiries.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor McKenney. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute, Councillor.
That is the first time I've ever done that. I had a perfect record up until today. Built heritage. Darn. Anyway, back to my question. When did this property first go on to the registry?
Councillor, this property was listed in, I believe, October 2020 through the batch of listings that were brought forward for Centertown through the Centertown Heritage Study.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. So has this owner come back through the annual review before this year and asked for removal?
Yes, we received a request for removal for the annual 2020 report for the Heritage Register as well.
Okay, so we're looking at 2 years later. So I'm not sure why today, as subcommittee was approaching, there wasn't adequate time to get legal counsel. I guess I'm not asking you that, it's my opinion. You know, this has been a long-standing issue. This property has been included on the registry for good reason. We've all approved it. And I really don't see any good reason to even bookmark it. I mean, here's my point, is that if the owner feels that he has legal recourse to remove this property outside of our process, because what we're dealing with this morning and at committee and council is our process. So if this owner feels that he has legal recourse, and this, because I'm asking our legal department this, that would happen outside of, we're not going to make a decision based on somebody else's legal advice. I'm guessing that would be a process outside of subcommittee, committee and council. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Chair. There is nothing in this report today or committee's recommendation that changes or alters this particular property today. It is already listed on the register. Staff have made the decision not to remove it, but committee's decision today doesn't change anything for this property owner at this time, and there is time for them to consult with their legal counsel and take whichever action they so choose based on that advice.
Okay, so just for clarity then for my colleagues on this subcommittee, is that decision was made. It's been contested. It's been contested again today. Fair enough. That's people have the right to. But nothing would change in terms of staff's recommendation to us based on it's proper legal counsel addressing this subcommittee. As Councillor Moffat pointed out, this is not, we're not a court. We are a subcommittee and dealing with staff's recommendations. So just on that, I will leave it and say that I support the staff recommendation as it stands. Thank you.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Moffat.
Thanks. And just to build on what Councillor McKenney was referring to and speaking of, I heard the reference to asking staff to do more work. I would like that, if that's going to come forward and that's a direction I want to vote on that. I don't want to waste staff's time on this anymore. If we have submissions from this applicant, we have a letter going back to 2020, October 2020, that even references their legal counsel at that time. This is not a property owner that hasn't sought legal advice about this property before. They have done so when we added this property to the register. This is in that same letter, they refer to a conversation with Councillor Diane Holmes in 2005 about the heritage value of the property and about the potential for heritage designation in the future. So if any motion was to come forward today, and credit to one of my colleagues who threw this to me in a text, the motion should be about actually exploring to put this building on the heritage, actually designated as heritage under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. That's what this committee should be looking at, because there's this building, there's the one next to it, 162. They're surrounded by redevelopment. Make no mistake, the owner of this property wants to tear this building down and take advantage of the opportunity that exists on that property and likely the property next to it, 162, whoever owns that, maybe the same person. But I don't agree that staff should waste more time on this property. I think we move on and that's it. So I don't accept the direction that was put forward to ask staff to review between now and council. Like, that's been done. So let's put that to a vote.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. And just going back and forth here with Councillor Brockington, I know that you had expressed a desire for a direction, and my understanding was an issue of process. without the historical file in front of us. So there was a bit of a challenge for myself, not realizing the history behind this, but noting that we do have a process in place, and noting that this isn't probably an issue of time. I'm just wondering if you would agree that we should withdraw that direction to staff.
Thanks, Chair. And I probably don't disagree with much of what Councillor Moffat and McKenney have already said. I just believe that if you have someone that comes to committee and says, hey, before you make a decision this year, I want to have some legal advice, I think that should be respected. So all I'm asking is that our staff simply reach out to this person before the city council meeting and give us an email update or memo before that council meeting. So I don't think this is a huge investment of staff's time. I do recognize there's been a lot of work to date, and maybe we're going around the mulberry bush here, but I just think that that process should be respected. So I'm not asking for it to be voted on. I would hope my colleagues just simply agree that staff reach out, get some information and report back.
And I just would imagine that that would happen in due course if a resident reached out. It did feel to me to be, in a sense, a material misrepresentation, to come to us, and it sounds as if this is a last minute issue when it obviously was not. So I'm not seeking, obviously, formal direction, and I'm just pleased if we move forward with consideration of the report before us. So there's a little bit more discussion than I had expected on this item. Is this report carried?
Carried.
And this report is scheduled to be presented to council on April 27th. The next item is heritage permits issued through delegated authority 2021. There is no presentation on this item. We did not receive any correspondence. There are no speakers registered. Does the committee have any questions for staff? Seeing no questions and probably no comments, is the report carried?
Carried.
Excellent, thank you. This report is scheduled to be presented to Planning Committee on April 28th. The next item comes from the Office of the City Clerk, and it's the status update for Built Heritage Subcommittee inquiries and motions for the period ending March 30th, 2022. There's no presentation on this report and no correspondence or registered speakers. Does the committee have questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, is the report received? Received. Thank you. There are no in-camera items. There is an item for information previously distributed, designation refusals for the first quarter of 2022. And there is an IPD listed on the agenda for information relating to designation refusals. There are any notices of motion? Seeing none. Any inquiries? Seeing none. Under other business, there is a planning circulation on the agenda, which was distributed to members prior to the meeting. Members of the public have the opportunity to comment through DevApps on ottawa.ca. And an Ontario Heritage Act application would be considered at a later date. And that planning circulation deals with Wilbrod Street. Is there any other business? Seeing none, on adjournment, is the motion carried?
Carried.
Carried.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And the next regular meeting will be held on May 10th, 2022.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.